The World Health Organization has declared COVID-19 to be a pandemic, and one by one, nations around the world are shutting down social settings, groceries, and businesses in order to prevent the spread of this pathogen. And suddenly, many persons find themselves making some tough choices, not least of which, how are they going to eat? By sheer dint of our lifestyle, my wife Daphne and I found ourselves extraordinarily prepared to handle this dilemma. I grew up on an old-fashioned farm where raising and storing food via traditional methods was par for the course. And Daphne has been a student of this art even more than I have. But more usefully, I have spent most of my life living in wild areas, such as the Alaskan bush, where our cabin was so remote we only made it into a city for resupply 3 or 4 times a year. So we learned long ago how to shop for the long haul, and in hopes of helping you prepare for the self-isolation that is, at this time, the best deterrent to the spread of COVID-19. I'm going to offer you what tips I can on how to grocery shop to set you and your family up for the long haul. Many of the persons who follow my channel are also interested in foraging, and especially for those who live in rural areas, this can be a useful way to add variety and nutrition to your diet. But what you're going to have a harder time accomplishing with foraging is getting calories. Not nutrition, calories. It is possible to forage for calories, but you'll require some particular skills to accomplish it, which I'll go over in a future video. For now, we're going to cover what to do in the way of shopping to prepare your family not to have to get out and about for a long while. I want to add that at this point there is little defense against this terrible disease, COVID-19, also known as the coronavirus. The best defense and the best protection method is to avoid getting it and avoid sharing it. And this means the best thing that you can do for yourself and others is stock up on the things that you need for at least 3 months, and then avoiding crowded social areas. In other words, social distancing. This is not hoarding. This is not selfishness. This is not glutting. This is taking you and yours out of the risk equation so that you have a minimal chance of getting this, spreading it, or taking up valuable hospital resources. With that said, there is a considerable amount of misunderstanding about how to prepare. Let's take a look at how you should be getting food resources ready. You'll want nutrition, and things like these fruits and vegetables look great. The problem is they don't keep very long. Don't get more than 2 weeks worth. One must also remember that vegetables, and to a lesser degree fruit, don't pack much calories. Under normal circumstances, when we're eating for health, mostly what we want is nutrition. When you may not be able to return to a grocer for weeks or potentially months, what you need to think about is energy. You need calories. A few days ago, a friend shared an image in which she stated she was prepared and had a fridge filled with various nutritious vegetables. But the reality is, in terms of energy, there was probably not more than 1 day's worth of calories in that food. In nature, nutrition itself is not usually all that hard to come by, with a few exceptions. What is much harder to find are calories. Energy, the energy our bodies need to burn so that we can live and carry on our daily activities at full capacity. So in terms of nutrition, do stock up on about 2 weeks worth of fresh vegetables, but expect that after that, there will no longer be much good. So prepare to get canned goods, canned vegetables, and canned fruit in so much as possible. It's heavy and it takes a fair bit of storage space, but it's not all that difficult to stock up 2 to 3 months worth of canned fruits and vegetables for several people. As an additional precaution, you may wish to visit a restaurant store or a bulk store and get a large package of the vegetable stock used as a base for many soups. It's not ideal, but it does pack a fair bit of nutrition, which is flexible and can be put into many types of dishes. It's also a good idea to get about 3 months worth of multivitamins for each member of your family. And expect that during this period, if you cannot get to the grocery, you will not be able to eat your favorite dishes or eat fresh. We must adapt in order to stop the spread of this terrible illness and to protect ourselves. For persons who know how to forage and live in northern areas, we are coming into the spring season, and at latitudes lower than my home country of Canada, there is already a fair bit available. It is still important to forage responsibly. Do not hoard, or there'll be nothing left for next year. And who knows if we'll need it next year. Even for persons in the north, there is presently forage available, and I went foraging yesterday. But we'll cover that in a later video. For other information on foraging, see my previous videos to begin to get a sense of what to look for, at least north of the 45th parallel east of the Mississippi River. We live on a farm and grow much of our own produce. But just as in the old days, spring was the hard time, when the days were warming but still cold and there was still a bit of ice on the ground, because it was the time furthest from last year's bounty, and there was not going to be new food for weeks or months. We're at that point right now, so we did a bit of stocking up. And what I would advise is you look for those vegetable products that will provide both calories and nutrition yet will keep. In most homes, it's easy to get turnips, rutabaga, cabbages, and carrots to keep. For Daphne and I bought 50 pounds of each in bulk. We have a root cellar, so back at the cottage they were all removed from their original packaging and placed into crates packed with sawdust or sand down in the cool of the root cellar, which will naturally help them to keep. These simple vegetables will form a nutritious basis for various stews that we can concoct. If you don't have a root cellar, you can encourage this produce to keep by removing it as quickly as possible from any plastic packaging and place it, if you have nothing else, in paper bags, or mesh bags, or in a pinch, old pillowcases, which can be gotten cheaply and in quantity at most any used clothing store. In my experience, wood chips and sand make ideal packing material, and you want to keep the vegetables from touching each other. But if you don't have that, you may consider cotton down, cotton swabs, or using old rags for packing material. But for cabbages, just pack them in the cool, dark, and open air and they'll keep fine. And remember to use your fresh vegetables and even these items first. Intermix them a bit with your staples for variety and stretch things, but there's no point keeping them beyond their storage date. Potatoes also provide a natural and nutritious starch and are generally even easier to pack. Just place them in crates. Wooden crates are ideal, though plastic milk crates or wire crates can work just as well, and put the crates in a cool, dark place in your home. Potatoes kept in such circumstances, especially in the cool dark of a root cellar, can last through an entire winter. It is important to wash and eat the skins of potatoes in order to get their full nutritional value. 90% of the nutrition in a potato is within 2 millimeters of the skin. If you don't eat the skin and that outer part, you're just eating simple carbohydrates. You might as well be eating spoonfuls of sugar. Let's look at how to get energy, calories, because in a situation where we have to get by on a limited quantity of supplies for a long haul, calories are going to be key, and in the natural world, they are much more difficult to come by. However, grocers still offer caloric foods in abundance, and they are not too difficult to find if you just look about. Peanuts offer an immense source of calories. Buy them in bulk, at least a couple pounds worth per week for each member of your family, and learn to add them to foods. It's not very popular in North American cuisine to add peanuts to hot foods, but in Asia this is not unusual at all. And they add a lot of flavor. But more importantly for these circumstances, they add calories and useful fats to the various dishes we might create, and they also help vegetable-based dishes to be more filling. Wheat flour has been a staple of the world since prehistoric times, and for good reason. It packs some nutrients and it is a dense source of calories. But perhaps most importantly in times like these, flour can keep for years in proper circumstances. The advantage of flour is that it can be used in many different ways. It can be made into dumplings for stews and desserts, it can be made into flatbreads, and it can be made into leavened breads. For all these types of breads, it is useful to have a bit of salt on hand as it helps the texture of the flour, and for flatbreads, it's useful to have a bit of oil as it's a fairly easy way to keep the flour from becoming too hard. For leavened breads such as rolls, it's still fairly easy to stock up on baking powder, and you can get bulk packs of yeast. I doubt that it'll become necessary to consider natural sources of yeast, but the reality is that yeast is ubiquitous. If you live in a natural place and you're running low on good yeast for the purpose of making bread, you can get yeast off of most any leaf or blade of grass. Just stir them through a bit of water with some sweetener in there to encourage the yeast to grow. Wait until the yeast foams up. It's going to take a bit longer than it would if you were to add a teaspoon of yeast to water, since there won't be as much initial yeast to start with. But once it does foam up, you can just add it to your flour and let it leaven as per normal from there. I'm not going to go into recipes on how to use flour. There are many out there. What I will say is I make bread every single week, and it's a fairly simple process, requiring only about 3.5 cups of flour, a teaspoon of salt, and a bit of yeast for a single loaf. Flour does have one substantial disadvantage, however. It is fairly energy intensive to prepare and requires substantial heat for a period of time. However, this heat can be provided through solar methods, or if you live in the backcountry as we do and have wood available, it's not all that difficult to rig up a stone oven in which you can bake it. It helps to have a large, hefty cast iron Dutch oven though. We have two, and they aren't that expensive. Presently you can get them on Amazon for about $50. If you live in the city and there are any concerns that the power grid might be shut down at some time, you can pre-cook flour in a form that will keep indefinitely by turning it into hardtack, which is just basically flour, salt, and water baked. It's very hard, but the flour is cooked and can easily be broken up and softened with other liquids as in stews and become something like dumplings. Doesn't taste all that great, but it is calories, which will help stretch your rations. Rolled oats are another excellent option. They can be eaten as a sweetened cereal, baked to make granola-type foods, and in ancient times they were boiled and used as a staple in porridges, such as Roman pulse. This is a dish Daphne and I experimented with last month, and it was surprisingly good. Oats are nutritious and they pack a lot of calories. I recommend getting a big sack of oats, 50 pounds, maybe 100 pounds to help your family get by. It might be a food you have to turn to in a pinch, but in a pinch, you'll be glad you had it. And with rolled oats, all you have to do is heat water to boiling, put the oats in there and let them sit for a few minutes and they're ready. And very dense grains, such as this Red River cereal, which is widely available in Canada, I'm not so sure about in the USA, is another excellent source of calories. I've added 5 boxes to our supplies. You may also want to consider popcorn. Yes, popcorn on your list of things to get. Popped in oil, popcorn is a substantial source of calories. And if your kids are bucking against a diet of stew and dumplings, they may enjoy a treat of popcorn now and then. Always pop it in oil to maximize the calories. And speaking of oil, stock up on oil. Normally, I would emphasize the healthier oils, such as olive oil and sunflower oil, but in times like these, you'll have to make do with whatever oil you can find. And secondary to oil, you may consider lard. Again, not optional in normal times as it's not healthy for the cardiovascular system, but still, it adds calories and can help in the preparation of many breads and pastries, which may, just as in times of old, become essential if infrastructure shuts down for a while and for a time it is difficult to get food at a grocer. Oils are not only essential for cooking, but they add an immense amount of caloric energy to whatever food is cooked in them. So in that sense, they are very useful. Try to reuse your oil, make everything stretch. Remember, the oil itself is a food, and it may be that that source of energy comes to play a significant role in how long and how well you can maintain social distance till this disease, COVID-19, is dealt with. You may be tempted to stock up on citrus fruits such as lemons and oranges. While it's not necessarily a bad idea, only get about a month's worth. You may have difficulties getting them to keep beyond that. Though with oranges and limes, it's easy enough to freeze them and then use them later for their vitamin C. However, most any spruce or pine tree has needles that are rich in vitamin C, and these can easily be converted into tea. And lastly, I'm just going to bring up apples, which I consider to be a special case. Because while these days we think of apples as a fruit that we might use either fresh or in things such as desserts, only a century ago and well into prehistory, apples formed a staple food. They were a fair source of calories and nutrition, but very importantly, they kept very well. They're fairly easy to keep in a cool, dark place such as a root cellar. It's not too difficult to slice them thinly and dry them in an oven at low heat, or rig up a solar heater and dry them outdoors, a topic I will try to find time to cover later on. And before potatoes were discovered and added to the Western diet during the colonization of South America, apples formed a staple in many soups and stews. If you can find them at a good price, I recommend on stocking up on apples, in the same way that you would stock up on potatoes. And then finally, it does help to have morale foods around. My wife and I are quite fond of chocolate, not chocolate candies mixed with things, just chocolate itself. And it's not something that we can grow or forage here in the north. So we stocked up on several bulk cans of cocoa powder and about 10 pounds of dark chocolate and milk chocolate bars. She likes the dark chocolate. I find it too bitter. It's a good calorie source, and chocolate is also a good source of healthy fats. But that's not what I'm referring to here. What I mean is morale foods. It's okay to get a bit of candy or some chips or other things like that, just as treats for everyone in the family to have now and then. It helps people to feel good and reminds them that at some point, life is going to get back to normal. It's especially useful for helping kids to cope. But let's be honest, adults like a little treat now and then too. So don't go crazy on it, but do allow yourself some. The ratio my wife and I went with was the equivalent of 2 chocolate bars each, once per week for the next 4 months. For foragers, spring is around the corner and there'll be more variety soon. Especially if you live in rural areas, you may want to leave some of those grocery store vegetables for urban folk who don't have the open access and the knowledge to take advantage of it that you do. For everyone else, let's keep our heads, keep our cool, and do what we have to reasonably and compassionately take care of ourselves, our own, and others as well by ensuring that we do not share this terrible illness. Take care.